talking for several. Oh, okay, continue.
It works.
So it does. So we had been meeting a couple times, via phone, I think. And she asked me if I was ready for a challenge. And I said, sure. So Martha was the one who kind of introduced the minutes to me. And I had no idea what that was. And in overview, it's really just a way of being present with God 24/7, which sounded really intriguing to me. I wasn't sure it was possible that I could do that, but it definitely sounded interesting to me. So many years ago, I had read the book Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really helpful to me. But at the same time, he lived, 500, 600 years ago, and he was a monk. So I figured, well, of course it's easy for him because he's just, peeling potatoes all day or, repairing shoes. So of course he can keep his mind on Jesus. But he had an amazing relationship with Jesus. I mean, he was so in tune with him. It was like Jesus was right there all the time. I mean, they would talk all day long. And I remember reading it then thinking, oh, this is amazing. Like, I would love that. But again, kind of read the book, thought about it, but then, I didn't think it was realistic. And so anyway, Martha talked about this book called Letters. It's called Letters by a Modern Mystic. And it's by Frank Laubach. And they're letters that this man wrote to his father, kind of explaining this whole process. And just really briefly, I call him Frank. So Martha and Mari laugh because they know that I call him Frank. But he was he wrote this book when he was at like a really discouraging point in his life. And he was a minister and a missionary to like a people group of Muslims in the Philippines. And this is in the 1930s, I believe. And his wife and child had to be left behind while he went to work with these people. So he was very lonely, and he started to wonder what his life might look like if he was in constant, in the presence constantly of Jesus. And he wanted to know if he would be able to like bring Jesus to mind at least 1 second of every minute. And so he decided to do this experiment, really is what it was. And he wanted to practice this and learn as he went until it became almost like a routine of breathing. That's really what his goal was. He wasn't sure it was possible, but he wanted to find out. So I'll just read a couple little things here. It's easier than me explaining it. So basically, in a nutshell, there's like two components of this of the minutes, and he just called it the minutes because it was his way of like remembering to be with Jesus every minute. But he said the first one is I have a study hour, or we have a study hour, and that for us might be our POR for half an hour in Matthew. So he says we have a study hour. We read and reread the life of Jesus recorded in the Gospels thoughtfully and prayerfully at least 1 hour a day. We find fresh ways and new translations so that this reading will never be dull, but always stimulating and inspiring. Thus, we walk with Jesus through Galilee by walking with him through the pages of his earthly history. So that was kind of like part one of the minutes, was just having some time in the Word every day. And then he said the second part of it was we make him our inseparable chum, which I love, the British word for friend. So we try to call him to mind at least 1 second of each minute. We do not need to forget other things nor stop our work, but we invite him to share everything we do or say or think. Hundreds of people have experimented until they have found ways to let him share every minute that they are awake. And so those were the two kind of primary ways that he wanted to practice the presence of God. He called it the minutes because he's, he called it a delightful experience and an exhilarating spiritual exercise. And the other way he described it, which I thought was really beautiful, is he said, we call this a game because it is a delightful experience and an exhilarating spiritual exercise, but we soon discover that it is far more than a game. Perhaps a better name for it would be an exploratory expedition, because it opens out into what seems at first like a beautiful garden. Then the garden widens into a country, and at last we realize that we are exploring a new world. This may sound like poetry, but it is not overstating what experience has shown us. Some people have compared it to getting out of a dark prison and beginning to live. We still see the same world, yet it is not the same, for it has a new glorious color, a far deeper meaning. Thank God this adventure is free for everybody, rich or poor, wise or ignorant, famous or unknown, with a good past or a bad. Whoever will may come. The greatest thing in the world is for everybody. So any questions on like what the minutes are at this point before I jump in? Okay, so Martha just asked me to kind of talk a little bit about how I've implemented, what it's done for me, how I incorporate it into POR. And I'll say I started off, so anyway, I guess this was around December timeframe. And so I bought another copy and I sent it to Mari. And I said, Mari, you are like the only person I can think of who would be brave enough to do this with me and maybe crazy enough to do this with me. And she was all in. She's like, oh, do it. I love this. So I was so grateful because it's been such a joy to walk with her in this process. And we kind of share our successes, and on those days, you know, those days when we don't do it so well. And again, just to start off, there's no condemnation. Like, you know, I think the first day I maybe 3 minutes, you know, out of 24 hours. And so, and other days I did really well, and other days I just, you know, failed miserably. But I don't see it as failure. I just see it as I'm practicing. So initially I just started off like speaking to Jesus in my mind. Like in the book, Frank talks like when he talks to Jesus, he says a lot, I just want to do your will. I love you, Jesus. You know, he just constantly says, I love you, Jesus. You know, I want to do your will, you know. So I would just in my mind, just speak to Jesus as often as I could when I was doing the dishes or when I was taking a shower or whatever it was I was doing, where I didn't have to really focus on maybe, you know, other things. I would just be speaking to him and trying to be mindful of him at all times. And what I discovered was by doing that, it also forced me to realize what I'm thinking about. Like when you're so aware of what you're thinking, you start to look at what you're thinking about. And I realized there was a lot of nonsense there was a lot of just stuff in my head that I was focusing on that I had no business focusing on. Not bad stuff, but just completely unnecessary and would really just probably, if I kept going down that road, add to my anxiety or stress or, you know, unhappiness or whatever. And so it kind of, the first thing I noticed is that it cleaned up my thinking. Not that it went away completely, but it really made me aware of what my thoughts were. I also discovered that my mind wanders like horribly all the time. Like it's just like, and so that was just, it was enlightening to me because I didn't realize I was that, you know, what's the word? Unfocused. So as I started doing this more and more, I realized that I could be in the mid-sentence talking to Jesus in my mind, but then like, oh, a bird, you know, or like it just really, I would be distracted so quickly. So then to prevent my distracting thoughts, I started to speak out loud instead. I just walk around the house and say, oh, Jesus, you know, I love you. And today's such a beautiful day. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. And, but then, and Mari and I laughed about this, but then after a while, I got really tired of talking because I'm not a big talker. I'm really I'm very introverted actually. And so after a while, it just became like a chore and a burden just to talk to him out loud. So then finally, what I settled on was just imagining him with me all the time. Like I just like imagined him next to me. And so there were times in the day when we would just sit quietly together. But then there were other times when I would talk to him either verbally or in my thoughts. But it wasn't this like constant like trying to like conjure up conversation with Jesus. It was just a more natural thing. And so over time, it just kind of evolved. I just tried different things until something finally just clicked and it started working for me. So my challenge is I've had good days, I've had bad days. My challenge is not to condemn myself on the bad days where I feel like I have failed. I know that it pleases Jesus greatly that I even just try to be, you know, in fellowship with him. I did buy 2, like I guess, prints of Jesus. I have one on my back table back there. You can't see it, but then I have one on my desk too. So I just look at him a lot during the day too. I just turn my eyes and see him. And I hadn't even started watching the Chosen when I bought these prints, but now when I watch these episodes, so often he says to people, look at me, look at me, look at my face, so that has, taken on more meaning to me now that I've started watching the show and having that picture there. I just look at him, and sometimes I don't even say anything. I just look at him, but it's keeping my mind fixed on him. So how it's changed my life. I have never really considered myself a great or even good prayer. My focus tends to be, and my thoughts scatter. Like I can sit down and pray for someone, and it's very sincere, but it's pretty quick. I don't go into these long labored prayers because I figure like God already knows what they need, and so I can just, So I'll give you an example of that, which I thought, and Mari and I both commented on this and how helpful this was. So in the book, Frank talks about how while he was doing this, he would allow his mind just to it's almost like it was like a airplane, and it would go, over this city that he knew he had friends in, and he would see their faces. And his prayer was, as he was moving along, like he had friends all over the world. So he would go to Africa and Asia and the United States and England, and he would just picture people's faces. And as God brought faces to his mind, he would just say, your will be done. Your will be done. Like your will be done is so much better than all of my exhausting, and that's what it feels like to me sometimes. Prayer has often felt like very exhausting. Like I have to cover all the bases, or I'll miss out on something or miss out on someone. And that always feels like burdensome to me. And so sometimes I can be like, yeah, I just don't have the energy for that right now. And, so I don't go to God when, so this has changed in the sense that just directing my thoughts to Jesus now is a form of prayer. Like just being with him all day, and I just talk to him throughout the day. I don't have this like, okay, I have to sit down and now spend 20 minutes in like really focused, intentional prayer, because I would fail a lot. So now I just spend the day in random places and random times praying to him. And that's worked really well for me. Let's see. I also, how it's also changed my life is that because he's next to me all the time, I have become more mindful of what comes out of my mouth. Not that I'm perfect by any means, and I still mess up all the time, but there have been times when I have been so close to saying something, and I just feel like the Holy Spirit saying, don't say it. Don't say it. Just swallow it. I'll take care of it. Just swallow it. Don't go there. And that's been really helpful for me. And in doing that, I feel like I win a small spiritual battle there, because, and Mari and I have talked a lot about this, like with the enemy, he comes in through our emotions a lot, right? And so if he can get me upset or triggered, and I'm like, then he's won, So this has been a really good, a very helpful way for me to just win that spiritual battle when I've been tempted to say something I shouldn't. The other thing that I think too has been really helpful in picturing Jesus with me, when I wondered sometimes, like, is it going to be distracting when I'm like with people or in a group of people? But what has surprised me is that I often feel more empathy for them and more connected to them, because I feel like Jesus is standing right there, and if I listen and if I really seek to connect with him, he'll tell me what to say to them, or how I can be present with them, and that's made me even more aware of him and his presence. So okay, so how it interacts and supports with POR. So for me, instead of rushing through a prayer time after POR, which was what I was doing before, now if I'm short on time, I can just hold Jesus in my mind throughout the rest of the day and practice his presence, and just bring things up to him as I go along the day. For me, it actually extends my POR time, and it makes it more pleasurable, because otherwise I was like, okay, I got 15 minutes of POR or 20 minutes of POR, and then I got to leave 10 minutes or so of prayer time. And now it's like I can spend more time in POR and just get more out of it, and then realize that I will process this with him throughout the day. which I think it makes it more richer and more meaningful too. And then as far as specific actionable steps, obviously the first step would be to get the book. It's very good. He writes very like poetically. I just really appreciate some of his letters, a lot of his letters. I would say start small and set a realistic goal the first couple of weeks, and just, increasing the minutes as you go. Keep asking Jesus to help you, and he will. We always hear that he loves to be sought. And I believe that. I really do. I feel like the more, especially when you read the book, like you'll see, like, I think it covered about 18 to 24 months out of his life. And, he really like laments in the beginning about how like miserably he failed, and how like he can't even like, keep his mind on Jesus for 2 minutes or whatever. But then by the end, I mean, he's really like, he is hearing God a lot more clearly, and even God's downloading things to him. And so that's really encouraging for us. I think overall, you will find that your heart will just grow much more tender towards him. I know it has for me. I do have to be mindful though, that it's so easy to let this slide, and kind of, and I've certainly had weeks where I haven't really been doing it very much, but then I really feel like I miss it. I miss him. And I know that, I know what it feels like to do it and not to do it. And so it's really, for me, kind of an act of the will to keep doing it, because it's so beneficial. So I'll stop there. Martha and Mari, if you guys want to jump in and say anything. Mari, you don't have to. I just know that you enjoy the process too.
I think the first and most important advice is leave judgment of yourself completely out of it. That should never enter your mind if you do that. If you start this, however well it goes or however poorly it goes, it doesn't matter. I just think if you have the desire to do it, eventually it'll take the shape that it's meant for it to be, but the shape it needs to be for you. And I think it's going to be different for everyone. And I like talking about it with Helena, because I've learned, we kind of sound out as, look, what would you do here? And how would you keep doing? Like, I never even realized that, like, when I'm running errands and I get kind of frantic, I'm rushed and I have stress. And she said, well, when I go to the grocery store, I imagine Jesus walking with me. And I went to the grocery store that very next day. And all of a sudden, I'm not like rushing through the aisles. I'm walking like in a very controlled, breathing deeply. My chest is open. I felt like, oh my gosh, I can grocery shop like this instead of being frantic and running through the aisles and, being upset because there's a long line. It was a completely different experience. Driving is completely different, because you come to the red light, you can talk to Jesus, he's right there. I'm on overdrive a lot, and I realized that when I am on overdrive, it's like an immediate sign for me, like, oh, I haven't been spending the minutes because I'm on overdrive. And it's almost like my blood pressure comes down within a couple of minutes of just realizing that, look where you were at. So, and it kind of evolves.
Yeah.
Things that you in the beginning you thought that were working, then eventually like, oh, I think this works better. So it's an evolving thing, just like a relationship is going to be evolving our entire lives. So and kind of be open to anything. And that is so true what you said about that you put a guard over your mouth. I've almost even felt like a hand over my shoulder when I want to say something, and it probably wouldn't have been anything too nice. Now I just of course it doesn't happen every time. I'm not, but when it goes well, I just observe and I keep it to myself. And a lot of times the emotions don't even come to it, play a part in it anymore. When you say something, it just enforces things even more. You just threw fuel in the fire. When you just observe it, keep your mouth shut, it kind of like diffuses itself. The enemy got no airtime.
Right.
So I kept my mouth shut. So it's interesting little things. And also the same thing that I don't know why it's so difficult for us to keep focus as human beings to begin with. Like, why is it like when you know something is so good for you, why is it that you realize a week later, oh, I didn't even do it? That I find disappointing. I wish we had like some sort of I think I've used this word with Helena, that I want to be like super glued to the source. There's no way ever that I would be able to let go of it. But there's no super glue. It's just kind of discipline your mind.
Yeah, but you know what I think is really cool? I agree with you 100%, Mari, is that like, I don't know about you, but I'll say like, sometimes I don't realize that I'm kind of sliding and I haven't done the minutes for days or a week. But then when I do, it's like, oh, that's why I've been feeling cranky or emotional or whatever. Like it's, I know the difference now, whereas before I didn't even know the difference. So that's progress, you know.
You notice the immediate benefit.
Exactly. Yeah.
So a couple of things I would throw in. First of all, Mari, I love your example of shopping and driving. And it reminds me of like a kind of an unpacking of the reality and vision meditations where you see your normal reality, shopping and driving, and then you compare that to how beautiful life is when you're shopping and driving with Jesus right beside you, how it changes that. I think that's so cool. And I totally get what you're saying about super glue. I've thought a lot about like, why is, inner change so hard to become more like Jesus? Why can't we just be super glued to him, like you say, or why can't we just, anyway, but I was just thinking about that today, actually. And I was thinking about, I think it's Dallas Willard talks about that part of the best part of humanity, the part that makes us most special, like different from the animals, is our ability to choose for our whole life, everything, every moment, whether it's a big choice, like I'm going to give my life for this, or even if it's just a little choice, what I'm going to do in this moment. And because an animal can't do that. And of course, Jesus would be the ultimate example of choice, both in his little actions, but of course in his self-sacrifice being the biggest choice, and how much beauty there is in choice. That choice defines that. You look at a situation where it would have been easy and maybe easier to go one way, but when you make the choice for Jesus and to bring God in, the beauty of that and how much glory there is for God in that. So in some ways, I wonder if that's why he didn't super glue us, is because then every little moment we get the choice, we get the opportunity to make that worshipful choice that says, I'm going to pick you over my natural reaction or what would have felt good or been easier than that. So that's one thing I was thinking about. Another thing on minutes for me recently, since I read the book on Hudson Taylor, I think I've talked to you guys about, and I know Helena, you've read this one too, The Missionary to China. When he had his midlife transformation, one of the things that really struck me was that he went from, in his Christian life, from striving and effortfulness to resting and trusting. So I've even thought about this with minutes, that when I first started minutes many years ago, it was a very effortful experience for me. I was really trying. And I mean, you kind of, in some ways, we kind of need that, right? When we're learning a discipline, we have to be very intentional and it takes a lot of human effort. But I don't know that I was calling God into that much. I was really leaning heavily on myself, kind of a self-reliant attitude. So it's been really beautiful for me to bring in this blend of this trustfulness that even in my connecting with him, it's kind of what you were saying, Mari, earlier about how he does the cleaning of the well. He's also the one who brings me to him in every moment, that there's a sense of trust and rest in him helping me with the effort I need to do. So I probably can't say that quite right, but that's been really helpful for me. And then the last reflection that I would put in is, you guys know I'm reading this book from Dietrich von Hildebrand, I think it was. I don't barely know his name yet. That's got the chapter on recollection. I'm only about one section farther than last time we talked when I was in Colorado. And I've read that section quite a number of times because I still don't completely understand it. But it's interesting. I feel like the way he describes recollection is very much like minutes, because he's basically saying when you recollect, you step back from the situation that you're in, the current thing that you're thinking about, the task that you're doing, that you're so immersed in. You step back from it and first realign with God. You realign your, I think of the verse we read in Matthew, Anna, and I really like the verse that talked about that he has made it so that what was it? The wise and the intelligent can't figure it out.
But the little infants can.
But the little infants can. So, you know, the sense of like, Anna said something like, infants totally have it figured out. They know all they need is their mommy and their daddy. And I kind of think that in a sense, that's recollection, is saying, I'm the infant. I'm just the infant laying in his arms, and he's got me and he's got everything. But like, my orientation to the world isn't self-reliance or self-drive. It's completely being the infant in orientation towards him. That's kind of how minutes feels to me, you know, that like you're continuously reorienting yourself so that you're not just diving into the task or distracted, like you're saying, Helena, all these things that our mind is hopping around and the distractions where we go everywhere, but we're just keep coming back to that centering on him, and that changes the way we engage the task that we would have taken just on our own strength. So I think that's been kind of cool to see the connection between the concept of recollecting and the concept of minutes. I think that's very cool. Okay, let's see, how are we doing for time? 3:54. Anna, Pam, Mari, Helena, anyone have any questions, comments on the minutes before we close down that conversation? And Pam, I'm especially interested to hear if you have any reaction to all of this. You kind of got a big dose all at once.
I did, but it makes total sense. I'm in agreement with, even though I haven't done it, it's kind of the same concept with doing this study.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, to bring him to thought throughout the day. And that's what I've been doing. And, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, come on, I'm so distracted. I can't bring it. But the fact, and I read this somewhere else, the fact that you're even drawn to do it
Mm-hmm.
is a win.
That's
you
right.
know, that's what God wants, that, you know, that you're at least trying to focus on him, that the fact that you're dismissing your to-dos and your, you know, distractions, and the desire is there. So just the action needs to be there. And I'm particularly relating to Mari and her grocery store thing. Oh.
I love that.
Because it's like one of my worst tasks, chores that I just and I put this list in store order, and like Mari, I am laser focused. This, and if I have to go back because I missed something on the list, it just sends me reeling. Like, I need to go back. Do I really need that item? I don't even think I need it all that much. So yeah, so a lot of what was said I really relate to, and I think it's a great idea. The conversation, the thought, often pray unceasingly. We've been told in scripture, so it just plays right into that.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, well, we've got just a few minutes left. What I would like to do in closing is to revisit the topic that we were mentioning in our housekeeping, which is just kind of collecting together what prayers we have for Matthew, and for Matthew part 2. So, you know, what would be your prayer for what you would like to see unfolding as we do part 2? And
We're still recording, by the way.
oh yeah, should I stop recording? Where's that button? There it is.
Pause.